We had just left the port of Kirkwall, Scotland, way north in the Orkney Islands, on our sail to Tromsø, way north in Norway, north of the Arctic Circle. "When are we going to do a man overboard drill?" asked my watchmate, Rick Dykstra, a retired defense official from Australia. "We're not going to do a man overboard drill, Rick, because nobody's going overboard," responded the skipper, Captain Andy Schnell. We were setting off on his 48-foot swan called Isbjorn, a voyage of over 1,000 miles across the North Sea to Norway's Lofoten Islands. There were 6 of us in all: the captain, who hails from Annapolis, Maryland, his wife, co-owner and first mate Mia Carlson from Sweden, Laura Gale, a Canadian from Vancouver, my brother Dick, and myself, sailors in South Dakota since Boy Scouts, and Rick. The captain explained, "Sailing in the Arctic is unforgiving. With the water about 41 degrees and the likely state of the sea, fall overboard and you are dead." As such, when outside on the Swan, we would use 2 tethers, umbilical cords really, attached to our life jackets. Never were we to poke more than our heads outside of the cabin of this classic blue water yacht without hooking to something that would hold us fast. Turns out this is standard procedure for crossing an ocean in a small craft. "The stories are legend about just coming up for a second or 2 without clipping on," Andy explained. "Come outside untethered, 1 wave over the boat, you are gone. We'll probably never find you." As such, when on watch, I'd pull hard on my tethers to make certain the shackle was secure. Twice, it popped open. It hadn't properly been closed. Had a wave washed over the cockpit, the tethers would have been lashed to the boat, but not to me. Shackle open, untethered. Man overboard. Ouch. Sailing across the North Sea to the Arctic, we were dressed something like scuba divers going deer hunting in the depths of winter. Norwegian sailors and fishermen 120 years ago wore much the same gear as we. Their homespun boiled wool jerseys, sea boots, and yellow oilskins were updated to 2 layers of smart wool, 2 layers of Patagonia high loft pants and hoodies, wool hats, socks, gloves, waterproof boots, all wrapped like Christmas in ocean-rated Helly Hansen Gore-Tex bib overalls and jackets. Properly geared up, and when necessary, the only thing exposed to the elements were your eyes. Actually, quite handsome. "I always wanted to be an astronaut," explained the captain. "What we are doing isn't much different. Just as NASA does," he explained. 99% of the work of the trip had already been done in getting Isbjorn ready. The safety equipment, the technology, the weather forecasting, the boat itself. Isbjorn is our capsule, our cocoon. The only difference between us and someone in a spacecraft 130 miles above us is that they are 130 miles away from help. We are 250. Isbjorn translates to polar bear. She was built in the mid-1970s, is as beautiful as a Porsche, and as muscled as a thoroughbred. She was designed specifically for deep blue water sailing and had just been put through a thorough refit to prepare for Arctic conditions. She is a sailing machine, finely honed, elegant. "Our plan is to sail nonstop to Norway," announced the captain. "Our first port is 850 miles away." But he explained that weather in the North Sea is very unpredictable and cannot be forecast with any reliability further than, well, less than a day. "We'll take what it gives us," he said. On board, of course, were real-time weather charts, and on land, a weather consultant connected by satellite. We raised the mainsail, an arduous task, 2 crew members hauling with their full weight on the main halyard, while a third took up the slack on one of the winches. Later that day, the wind fell flat and we changed the headsail. Stowing and raising sails this large is akin to hefting an 800-pound sheet of thin ice, reeving it into a metal tube, and raising it forever to the sky. The jib finally set, we rolled it out again, and again we were underway. We sailed past a lighthouse, a castle, another lighthouse, passing ships, more lighthouses, all, I thought, very, very nautical. We'd been underway for what? 4 hours? 6 hours? I caught my breath. I looked here, there, all around, everywhere. There was no land anywhere. Just us in a small boat headed across a big sea. We were the tiny dot in the middle of a great circle, a feeling like a pinprick, then another and another and another prick, prick, prick. Then 5, 10 seconds of vertigo. I smiled to myself. We're here. I've sailed since I was a Boy Scout and have never been in open water, never been out of sight of land. No land anywhere. It was beautiful and it was wild. I was on the prairie. The waves were like grasses rippling in the wind. The grasses were like waves rolling from horizon to horizon. Later in the journey, when nights and days and nights and time had no meaning, I'd look out to the horizon as the whitecaps and swells would nip at each other on their race to infinity, and it would remind me of deer disappearing over the horizon on the prairie. Often on my watch, I'd be speechless. Time has no meaning here. Words have no meaning here. It is perpetual pitch, roll, and yaw. At times, I could feel ecstatic annihilation, that I was in an unwarped primal world. I was in the forever. Science tells us that the Earth turns some 1,000 miles per hour, and that the Earth goes around the Sun at some 50,000 miles per hour, and the universe around the center of the Milky Way at 500,000 miles per hour. Here, you know, such things are true. Boats are feminine, Isbjorn especially. The 48-foot Swan was our mother. She was tough enough to have birthed us all, tough enough to take us through heavy seas. She wrapped us in her embrace. When my 4-hour watch was over, I would crawl through the cabin, strip off my sea boots, drop my gloves and hats to the floor, and on 2 double-pronged hooks try to hang layers and layers of gear and follies. Often they tumbled to the floor, but I didn't care. They'd never dry anyway. My berth was on the port side, the left side of the boat in the bow, the very front. The berth had larboards, boards that like a baby's crib kept you from being thrown onto the floor as Isbjorn made her way through the seas. I had to pull myself up into the V-berth facing the bow, then take a 180-degree left turn dive into the berth and struggle into the sleeping bag like a 100-year-old man on a trapeze. But once in, sleep, deep sleep. Never wake up sleep. The water, slosh, the roll, the pitch, the dive, warmth, unimaginable sweetness, all in the eternal wetness of the day. Boats are feminine. Indeed, I was back in the room, water sloshing, rocking, diving, sweetness, sleep, unconscious, delirious. Anybody see land, Beck and Nia? Unlike the crew, where there were 2 of us on our watches, Nia stood watch by herself. But deliciously and impossibly, Nia also cooked. Breakfast mostly you put together yourself, same too with lunch, mostly sandwiches and perpetual handfuls of nuts and M&Ms. But dinner? Always served in a large bowl. How else are you going to eat on the sailboat under sail? And the meals? Thick stews made from scratch, fresh cooked meals smothered in sauces and sautéed with peppers and succulents. Her question of anyone want seconds was a rich invitation for more. Coffee was more important than blood, so fresh beans were ground by hand. The stove was gas-fired and gimbaled and swung with the sway of the boat. The hot water was poured from a kettle with a long serpentine spout. Coffee is gold. I was at the helm one night and promised my watchmate Rick $100 if he'd bring me a cup. He did, and I acknowledge my infinite debt. Coffee really is gold. I pledge to pay my debt. Be careful. Don't burn yourself. Frankly, it's not a capsize or drowning that poses the biggest threat. Big danger? Burns and fires, both to cabin, boat, and crew. A big risk as well. When down below in a sailboat in motion, you will be thrown around. Hang on. Luckily, there are good handholds everywhere, but sometimes it seems as if you are hanging on for your life. Once when we were sailing into a stiff wind and on a fairly significant heel, it took me 10 minutes to crab my way from the galley to the bow. On another day, one of us was sitting on the head and was thrown off the pod, through the door, splayed out onto the passageway. What happens at sea stays at sea. Question stands. Anyone see land? Queried Mia. And there was nothing. A cloud, a mist, something over there. It melts away, and then something that didn't melt away and still wasn't quite there. Land ho, someone cried out. We're losing our wind, said Andy, so we are going to spend the night in Fair Isle. Maybe two, he smiled. You take what it gives you. A lighthouse in the distance, and then finally the island, a turn to port and into a tiny bay surrounded by sheer rock cliffs stuffed full of nesting birds. We tied up to a concrete dock 10 feet above the deck of the boat, low tide. Fair Isle, a bird sanctuary, a destination and haven for birders, and home to 96 British citizens. Puffins, puffins, smiled our skipper. Wait till you see the puffins. Minutes after tying up to the quay, we were hiking the island, an improbable piece of rock 4 miles long, a mile across, so small it is unseen on many maps. Impossible, this place. On one of my walks, I talked to a man stepping out of a house. My daughter just moved here 9 months ago, the father from England explained. She's a physician's assistant, stays here year-round, and loves it. Me, he explained, this island is like Kent used to be when I was growing up. Everybody takes care of everybody else. Have to, he said as he made his way back into his daughter's home. The puffins? Well, of course you'd expect a bird this beguiling to be here in this remote and windswept rock. They live in small dugouts and pop up like marionettes, quite unconcerned with the presence of a human or two. Count the rings on a puffin's bill, and like rings on a tree, you've got its age. Sadly, though still abundant, the puffins are in a precipitous decline. Silvery sand eels are their primary food, and as sea temperatures have risen here, even just a degree, fewer eels, fewer puffins. After 2 nights at Fair Isle, it was back to the halyards and winches to raise the sails. But only 50 miles on our way, we picked up a gale warning. Luckily, Shetland was to port, and we tucked into Lerwick to spend the night. The harbor was bustling with training schooners and commercial traffic. The town of Lerwick was just what you'd expect a Scottish town on an island to be. One Shetlander stopped by the boat. Looking for crew? He asked. Early the next morning, as my watchmate and I were out for a walk, a young man walked up to us, swaggering, bloodied. How do I look? He asked. Any blood? Just enough to show that you've had a good fight, said Rick, telling him what he wanted to hear. Did you win the fight? I did, he replied, and walked away with a spring in his step. Later that day, we raised our sails and left Lerwick. Now, nothing but open water was between us and our destination. Our watch that night started at midnight. I was behind the wheel as instructed, just in case the automatic pilot failed. Rick was on the iPad looking for other ships. We were sailing through the North Sea oil platforms. You won't have a problem seeing them, explained Andy. They are lit up like Christmas trees. And indeed they were. We were riding the remnants of the gale, and on a downhill ride, our sails wing on wing with the jib, the foresail on the starboard side of the boat, and the mainsail out to port. The swells were 6 to 8 feet high and would sweep under the boat, pick us up like a cork, and then run under us off to their journey. We're on a collision course with this boat here, said my watchmate Rick, pointing it out on the iPad. We pulled the boat's details up, could tell its ladening, its size, its captain, its cargo, its destination. Things happen slowly on the ocean, Andy had explained before. Don't wake me up unless we are 2 minutes away from a collision. I was ready to knock on the deck that would get the captain up, the cockpit being just above his and Mia's cabin. "Look," said Rick, "she's changed her course." A few minutes later, we could see lights ghosting into the night. "The captain rarely sailed the boat. That's your responsibility," he explained. Oftentimes, however, a knock would come from below. "Come on, I told you to sail 120 degrees off the wind, starboard, 15 degrees. I'd hit the button on the autopilot 3 times, 5 degrees a beat. On and on we sailed, days on end, nights on end, 6 watches a day, 4 hours a watch, 24 hours a day. Seas would come from behind like a breathing giant and lift our stern on their bellies, and then running, race under our craft and be done with us heading for the horizon. The beast would turn a bit and we'd sway, shudder, and dive. But boats are meant to float, and up we'd mount, and the beast would breathe again. Its rhythm became ours, perhaps a song, perhaps a heartbeat, deep murmurs, tremors, rumbles, and soars. Indeed, Isbjorn was our capsule, was of the sea, was half dolphin, half bird. Some waves would have a husky, seething breath as they'd break underneath. Up we'd lift and on they'd run, and at times it was as if they looked back at us, sorry they'd missed their opportunity. Each wave, every wave, had its own character, but together they ran far away to forever, the scene vaster than vast, dreams yearning for eternity. It was morning, and once again Rick's and my watch. The seas were flat, almost as if a god had laid a piece of skin across the ocean. In the distance, a cargo ship was off our port bow. She headed south, we headed north. Off to starboard, a haze, no, not a haze, yes, a haze, no, definitely not a haze, an inkling. No longer were we sailing on water, but on a deep mirror, down, fathoms of mystery and maybe unease. Again, a spasm of vertigo. One must come to such a place as the Lofotens from the sea, because it is from the sea that such a place is born. As we skimmed the curvature of the earth, the distant mountains presented themselves as an awakening, a gift to us. I sat on the bow of the boat, breathless. Fishing boats were off to starboard, ferries further away in the distance. Humans inhabit this place, but from the sea it looks like only the gods should be living here. Later that afternoon, Bodo, landfall, and we drank our longed-for Lagavulin. Still, we had some hundreds of miles to go on this journey. One should take no solace that you've made it to the Lofotens, nor little comfort that you've left the open sea. The Arctic is unforgiving, Andy had said. Waters here in the West Fjord are about 110 miles long and 40 miles across. For tens of thousands of years, fishermen, sailors with no engines other than their sails and their backs would flock to the Lofotens in 24 hours of darkness, hoping the cod would make them rich. Such men do not speak lightly of Lofoten waters. Orphans and widows dream of their fathers and husbands preserved in icy graves in these beautiful waters. At the entrance of the Westfjord, the maelstrom, Edgar Allan Poe writes, I became aware of a loud and gradually increasing sound like the moaning of a vast herd of buffalo upon an American prairie. The current achieved a monstrous velocity, its headlong impetuosity lashed into ungovernable fury. Here the vast bed of the waters, seamed and scarred into 1,000 conflicting channels, burst suddenly into frenzied convulsion, heaving, boiling, hissing, gyrating in gigantic and innumerable vortices, and all whirling and plunging on to the eastward with a rapidity which water never elsewhere assumes except in precipitous descents. Yet, aching beauty as if the earth had been born here. The mountains stand like a single strand of pearls separating sea from land. Ole Rovog, author of the South Dakota epic novel Giants in the Earth, writes of the Lofotens, "The place lay on the sea as far out as the coast dared push itself and extremely far north, so far in fact that it penetrated the termless solitude where utmost light and utmost dark hold tryst." Fishing villages, their houses painted the color of tulips, were scattered as if they were Lego bricks thrown by some perfect child. At anchorages, we gathered and cooked gallons of mussels while the mountain peaks all around grabbed the clouds floating by, bathing in pink mist. Isbjorn's northward trek and the sun's passage towards the solstice now gave us 24 hours of light, but the white night, the night light, is virginal, hesitant, and shy. It would backlight the clouds and the mountains, but then seem to disappear as if it wanted more sleep. Night is never night, the dawn and dusk almost perpetual. The sun does lift itself into the sky, slowly, heavily, as if tired from lack of sleep. The early morning is a glow that paints everything it touches with soft breath and whispers. My grandfather's name was Thomas Stegen, from the town of Stegen here in the Lofotens. He'd come to America in the early 1900s. A year ago, my wife and eldest daughter and 2 of our grandchildren had come to his island by land. As we passed by Stegen, this time by sea, I couldn't help but ask for the help. Finally, the trip was done. We were in Tromsø, the land of Amundsen and other polar explorers. It was time for me to leave Isbjorn, the 48-foot swan that had been my home for 22 days. I left Isbjorn, but thankfully Isbjorn and her crew will never leave me. Isbjorn laid at rest and was reprovisioned, waiting for its next 4-person crew. This sail to the Arctic, the lands of icebergs and polar bears. How perfect for my Isbjorn.